Michael Horton, who was one of my professors in my doctorate studies at Ligonier, he shared this. It was great. He said, if you take the 5 points and you pull them out of their natural habitat, you typically end up with a wild animal. And that's exactly what you see happen, because in my context, where I come from, I didn't grow up Reformed. I didn't grow up in a Reformed church, had no idea about the Reformed confessions, didn't know they existed. So in my context, you can have a person who holds to TULIP, the 5 points. They call it Calvinism, and they think that's what it is to be Reformed. And then they can have a Baptistic ecclesiology, congregational type polity, and then they can embrace non-cessationist views of the gifts. And then they can embrace a classical dispensational view of end-time eschatology or the scriptures. And really, I call it a hermeneutic, how they read the Bible. It has more to do with hermeneutic than it does eschatology, in my opinion. But anyway, it leads to a different eschatology. And then after that, they can embrace types of revivalistic piety, and you can have, we're going to have a revival. I grew up with that. We're going to have a revival. I'm like, well, how did you know that? All borrowing from different confessional traditions, putting them all in a big soup, stirring it up, and innovating. And what they don't realize is that everybody has a creed or confession. It's either implicit or explicit. It's either written down or it's not written down. It's theoretical or it's functional, operative. And what I see a lot is that you have a theoretical confessional statement, but you have an operative confessional statement that you actually live and run your church by. And so really your confession doesn't have anything to do with your practice. But for example, in the Great Commission, Jesus very clearly links the means and the mandate and the message and the mission all together. They're inseparable. Related. The marks of the church are the mission of the church. And so, you had mentioned the church and the sacraments. For me, the word sacrament was you're Roman Catholic. And no one had ever taught me anything other than the typical evangelical Baptistic view of a memorialistic view of the sacraments. They're just dead, empty signs. And we remember something that happened 2,000 years ago, but have no present significance for my life. And oh, by the way, let's look to the future when he comes back, if you're lucky. But the Lord's Supper and baptism, I was never taught from baptism how, I think it's the Puritans, they talked about improving your baptism. Never taught that the sacrament of baptism was actually something that I could use in my daily life of sanctification to find not only comfort, but motivation to pursue sanctification. And so when I came into the Reformed confessions and I began to awaken to the Heidelberg Catechism, this is the best good news I've ever received and read in my life. And the Holy Spirit creates faith through the preaching of the gospel, the means and the message, and then he assures that faith through the sacraments, and he uses these visible gospels as means of grace for my life and my assurance. And so when you put the gospel in a proper context, confessional context, it gives you a whole way of looking at life, a whole new category of living. And so it's really been an impactful change for me.